I said, Ginger, I could go to prison for breaking antitrust laws for price fixing. It's a federal offense. And I said, the CEO is a billionaire. He's best friends with President Clinton. He owns 5% of a $70 billion company, the largest single shareholder, the 77-year-old CEO, who I reported to. I said, he will destroy us. He went to President Nixon's funeral, I told Ginger, on President Clinton's plane. He's on the phone with President Clinton a couple times a month. They will destroy us. This is the 56th largest company in America. They'd be larger than that today. I think they're number 40 or 42 today, so they're even larger today, ADM is. Great company, 30,000 hardworking people. So I don't want this to reflect on the company. It was just 4 bad apples at the top, and I was one of those bad apples. It was just poor leadership. So it wasn't a bad company. Similar to Enron and WorldCom, great companies, but had some bad leadership. And I was one of those leaders. So I want to make that clear. It's nothing to do with ADM. It's about 4 greedy top leaders of the company. So I said, Ginger, they had destroyed. She said, you know what, Mark? My CEO is bigger than your CEO. And I said, Ginger, you haven't worked for years. Who's your CEO? She said, my CEO is Jesus. And I said, Ginger, our CEO lives 7 miles down the road, and they're going to destroy us. She said, God will protect us. We're going to do it today. I've already put some things in motion, and it's going to happen today. Well, I don't know how many of you ever been in front of the FBI and told them you're stealing $1 billion a year, but I can tell you it's an interesting reaction. This reached Janet Reno, the Attorney General, William Sessions, the Director of the FBI. This became the largest price-fixing case in U.S. history, started by a stay-at-home mom raising 3 young kids. So, at the end of 4 hours talking with the FBI, I remember telling the FBI, you got all these drug dealers you're working with. I see them on the sidewalk all the time. What I've got, what Ginger has me here for, it's not worth talking about. All the things you got going on in Decatur, and bank robbers and drug dealers. And he said, well, how much money's involved? I said, like I said, all these drug dealers and stuff? I said, you surely got more to do. And Ginger said $1 billion. He said $1 million. She said, no, $1 billion. $1 billion. I said, what are we working on a plant contamination case for them? And then he said, well, how long has it been going on? I said, look at all these drug dealers. I saw him when I was pulling in to the FBI. He said, Ginger said, 12 years. He said, 12 years. So he should have just had the interview with Ginger and let me out of it. He got all the truth out. And at the end of those 4 hours, Ginger said, look, my husband did the right thing. He's only involved 7 months. It's been going on for 12 years. We go home now, right? The FBI said, your husband confessed to a crime that's hundreds of $millions, sometimes $1 billion a year. I have to arrest him today, or he has to start wearing a wire tomorrow. Well, I sure didn't want to be arrested. 34 years of age, not even 10 years out of college yet, 9 years out of college at Cornell. So I said, I'll wear a wire. That was a choice I had. Met him at 6 in the morning. They said take about 6 weeks wearing a wire. Met him at 6 in the morning. They'd shake my chest, put a microphone on my back with an athletic band, 4 different FBI agents. I'd rotate 2, and then the next day another 2, every Monday through Friday. And then they'd have another tape recorder in a briefcase and another tape recorder in a notebook. And I wore a wire, was wired up every Monday through Friday, 10 hours a day for 3 years. 1992 to 1995, from 34 to age 37. It wasn't 6 weeks, it was 3 years. I was falling apart. The FBI would say, Mark, if these guys catch you, they're going to kill you. This is an international cartel involved in billions of dollars. I lost 60 pounds wearing a wire. People thought I had cancer. People would say, Mark, you need to see a doctor because something's physically wrong with you. Even that was being wired and taped. So I'm wired. My mom would call, she's taped. My dad would call, she's taped. Someone come to have lunch with me, they're taped. I'm wired every Monday through Friday for 3 years, like I were alive. Go to the bathroom, you're on tape. I mean, it was a horrible experience. I don't recommend it to any of you, by the way. So I did it. Now we're getting close to this. I want to mention to you something about a green lamp. There's a green lamp that the FBI had a video camera in it. And this green lamp was at 2 or 3 meetings a month for 3 years. I would tell the FBI where the meeting's going to be because they knew this was going to be a long trial, one of the biggest companies in the world, 7-week trial. It was in Chicago. So they would get the green lamp in that room and they would be in the next conference room and they could control through a monitor and zoom that green lamp whoever was talking to capture everything in that meeting. And that video camera, that same green lamp, was at the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore. $1,000, it looked like a place like this. The lamp looked like it came from a yard sale. A couple weeks later, it was at the Mandarin Hotel in Hong Kong. Same green lamp, same 11 guys sitting around the table. A couple weeks after that, it was in the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago. And then Maui, Hawaii. That green lamp was at 2 or 3 meetings a month, 5 feet from the same 11 guys for 3 years. I look back and say, thank God we did not have a woman criminal among us. Because if we had a woman criminal among us, a woman would say, that green lamp is following us around the world. But when you got 11 greedy guys that are seeing millions of dollars of bonuses in their heads that are coming from this price-fixing scheme, they didn't see what was 5 feet from them. Until a trial in Chicago, 7 weeks long, and then they banged their heads saying, now they remember the green lamp. It was a little late when they wanted to show the jury how they gathered the evidence. I made the audio tapes. The green lamp made the video tapes. So as we get towards the end of the case, the last few months, the FBI say, Mark, we're coming to an end. You're only going to be wearing a wire a few more months. It's going to be over. They had a full immunity agreement signed for me, never to do 1 day in prison. Full immunity because they were so appreciative of me risking my life for them. By the way, there's a documentary on my website with the real 3 FBI agents on markwhitacre.com. And they did that because the FBI felt like the movie didn't capture the seriousness of the case. So they did a documentary to combat the movie. And that's on my website with my wife and I and the 3 real FBI agents. And you watch that and you get a little more about the seriousness about how they felt my life was in danger. So markwhitacre.com homepage under a tab called Investigation Discovery will take you right to their site and show you that documentary. It came a few months out after the movie. And so at that point, full immunity, never to be charged, and all I had to do was stay out of my own way. Couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. The last few months I'm thinking, who's going to hire me after wearing a wire for 3 years against my own company? It's easier to get a job as a felon than someone who wore a wire against your own company for 3 years. Who's going to hire me? At that point, I'm only 37 years old by the time I wore a wire 3 years, 12 years out of college. And I looked at that house and those cars. I thought, how am I going to keep this standard of living? I looked at about how much money I had in my account. I looked at the stock price that day. I looked at stock options that I had not cashed yet, not exercised. There was a set of stock options worth about $9 million, but it was about a year away from exercising. So I was going to be fired. Once they knew I was a mole, the FBI said, you got to be prepared. They're going to have a tough time keeping you once they learn that you're the informant when this case goes public. So I looked at that and I said, how am I going to get this $9 million? I said, I sure can't tell Ginger. She turned me in again. So I can't tell her. So I thought, well, I said, I'm number 4 executive. The accountants are scared to death of me. Anybody in that company knows that I'm the next COO. It's pretty obvious about the succession plan. He was even in Fortune magazine that I was likely to replace the COO. So the whole company knew about it. I knew they were scared to death of me. So I thought, well, I'll just write checks to myself. And then if it ever went to trial, I got stock options signed by our chairman and CEO that they owe me $9 million. I just cashed it in a year early. So I wrote 5 checks for $9 million, thinking I'm the smartest guy in the room, I thought. Thank God I went to Cornell, I thought. Wrote 5 checks to myself. Thought if they ever, how can the company turn me in? They're stealing $1 billion a year. For 12 years, how could they turn in for $9 million? And if they did, I had the stock options to show that the company was going to owe me that someday. A year later. So the day that ADM learned that I was the mole, that very day, because they had to sign those checks that were $250,000 above, they would even say a couple times, Mark, you're getting kind of greedy, aren't you? They signed them because I'm involved in a $1 billion crime. They just said, slow down, and don't take so much. But they signed them. So the day they learned I was informant, they made the decision, if I put them in flames on price fixing, they're going to put me in flames on the $9 million. They called the FBI that day, told them about the $9 million. The FBI come to my house. Ginger was there in the room, in the family room. They said, Mark, what about this $9 million? We've been working with you for 3 years. What's going on here? So I tell them about the $9 million. I showed the stock option. They said, Mark, we understand what your thinking is there, but you can't cash stock options in. There's SEC rules and guidelines. You just can't cash them in yourself. You got to wait till the exercise dates. I said, well, it's worth $9 million today, but they said, Mark, it may not be worth that a year from now. It goes by the exercise date. And so they said, you're going to lose your immunity agreement for this, the FBI said. So Ginger was furious to hear that. This is the first she's hearing about the $9 million. She told me divorce wasn't on the table, but murder was. And believe me, that was the time murder was on the table. So I wrote, so I explained it to them. They said, we're going to get you the best deal we can get you, Mark. We understand your logic. You helped us on a multi-billion-dollar fraud over 12 years, so we're going to get you the best deal we can get you. They went to the prosecutor and said, Mark Whitacre helped us on a crime that was going on over a decade, the biggest price-fixing case in history. He stole $9 million at a time that they really would owe him that a year from now. So they showed the stock option, tried to explain all that. Prosecutor said, we agree. Mark was under a lot of pressure, was not of a clear mind, was blowing the driveway off at 3 in the morning during thunderstorms. Neighbors was telling others that, 3 in the morning during thunderstorms, I'd be blowing the driveway off with a gas leak blower. I was falling apart during that time. So they were sympathetic. They said the FBI told the prosecutor, said, we should have never taken him undercover for 3 years. We don't even take agents undercover more than a year because they crack under pressure. Here's a guy that's untrained. We made him wear a wire for 3 years. The prosecutor sympathetic gave a 6-month plea agreement. 6 months. And Martha Stewart sentenced in federal prison. So I went from immunity, lost that because of the $9 million, then a 6-month sentence for the $9 million. Lawyer called me in Chicago, Mark said, a deal of a lifetime, 6 months in federal prison. 6 months, Mark. You go in at 30, I'm 38 by that point, you go in at 38, you come out at 38. Ginger said, Mark, let's sign it, put it behind us. I looked at Ginger and said, Ginger, this is all your fault. I've had to wear a wire for 3 years for 10 hours a day because of you. I've lost my position at one of the biggest companies in the world, number 4 executive, because of you. I said, I'm going to do the opposite, Ginger, you want me to do. I ripped up the plea agreement, threw it in her face, fired the lawyer on the spot, hired a group of lawyers, fought the case 3 years in the courts, and got 8.5 years instead. And I had a Martha Stewart sentence right in my hand because the FBI was so sympathetic because of all the help that I gave them wearing the wire. I was my own worst enemy every step of the way. Never make these kind of decisions in isolation. Look at the decisions I made, and look how bad these decisions were. I was so depressed at that point, pulled my car in one of the garages, wrote a 17-page letter to Ginger the day before to her and my kids, and I tried to kill myself. I was at the end of myself. I was hopeless and helpless. How am I going to go to prison? By that time, after fighting in court for 3 years, keep in mind this all started when I'm 32. Now I'm 40. Now I'm going to prison at age 40, and I won't get out till 49. And I would have went at age 38 and got out at 38. So I was so depressed, tried to take my own life, hospitalized for a month, treated for post-traumatic stress disorder, and heavily medicated for about a month. Sent home, had 7 months before I had to go to prison. Someone read about it in the newspaper, all the things I just shared with you, and about the suicide attempt and about the 6-month plea agreement thrown in the trash can. And he showed up, his name was Ian Howes. He was with a group called CBMC, Christian Businessmen Connection. He was CFO of a pharmaceutical company, 5 young kids, school age and younger, and his wife a lawyer. And I never forget, he said, Mark, prison is going to be the beginning of your life, and you're going to find your purpose in your life with the journey you're ready to start. I'm thinking, this is the craziest thing I ever heard. I told my wife that. I said, Ginger, there's somebody on the porch that's crazier than me. She said, that can't be. I said, he said, prison's going to be the beginning of my life, and I'm going to find the purpose in my life with this journey. And she fell to her knees in tears, Ginger did. And she said, thank God, God sent somebody. She said, Mark, I've been praying for you for 10 years. Your parents have been praying for you their whole lives. And you've never listened to us, but God sent somebody to talk to you. And I think to talk sense to you. And I pray you listen to this guy. And she was in tears. So I went out to Ian. I said, Ian, what do you have in mind? He said he had a study called Operation Timothy, and he was going to introduce me to God and introduce me to Jesus. I said, I went to church with my parents. I go to church with my wife. I already go to church. He said, Mark, I'm not talking about going to church. I'm talking about a personal relationship with Jesus, and I want to introduce you to him. And he spent 6-7 hours a week with me, introducing me to Jesus for the 7 months before I went to prison. And for the first time in several years, I started seeing a little bit of hope. I wasn't there yet, but I was starting to have a little bit of hope. My second week in prison, a man named Chuck Colson showed up. I don't know how many of you know him. He was White House counsel for President Nixon. Went to prison in the 70s, became a Christian. His nickname was the Hatchet Man. The director of the FBI, the Attorney General, the White House counsel, 12 of them went to prison. President Nixon was pardoned by President Ford, but the other 12 went to prison. Chuck Olson became a Christian in the 70s. He showed up my second week in prison and started telling me the same things Ian Howes was telling me. How his life was changed. He found his purpose in his life. And I told him about Ian Howes for 7 months. He said, Mark, have you given your life to Jesus? Have you surrendered your life? I said, it's given me hope, Chuck, but I have 8 years of college, including an Ivy League PhD, that I had professors say, for 8 years I never met one Christian Science professor in 8 years. And a few of them said, if you are a Christian, you can't be in my class. If you're a Christian, you can't be a PhD scientist. And I said, I've heard that kind of thing for 8 years, Chuck, between Ohio State and Cornell in the science community. He said, Mark, do you think there's a scientist that believes in God? I said, absolutely not. He started inundating me and discipling me, started article after article and book after book of Christians, or scientists that are Christians. Even Albert Einstein wrote an article. Albert Einstein said only God can create the universe and only God can create man, and the Big Bang Theory is impossible. I thought, well, Albert Einstein's a pretty smart guy. And I sure never learned that at the university. They hid that from me for 8 years. He showed me a book by Sir Isaac Newton that wrote as much about Jesus as he did about science. I said, they sure never told me that in my 8 years of education. Book after book, article after article, over 3 or 4 months' time, and then a book that really hit me. It was a book by an atheist scientist in Minnesota who's still alive today. His name's Don Byerly, B-I-E-R-L-E, Dr. Don Byerly. And this scientist, PhD biologist, so I could understand the language, wanted to prove once and for all God does not exist. He was an atheist. He studied it. He researched it exhaustively. He was obsessed with it. After 10 years of study, it proved to him that God does exist and Jesus is the Son of God. And he wrote a book called Surprised by Faith. I read that book and got down on my knees that day and gave my life to Jesus and said, how can you be a PhD scientist and not believe in God? It was my 3rd month in prison and I gave my life to Jesus, and it changed my life forever. I remember for the first time after years blaming my wife and blaming the FBI and blaming ADM. My wife would come to the visit room every weekend with my kids. She did that for 8.5 years. She moved to 3 different states to live next to 3 different prisons. With good behavior, you head to a better prison. I got to do my last 5 years in Pensacola, Florida Navy base. By the way, if you go to prison, that's where you want to go. I can help you get there. And she came every weekend. And for the first time ever that weekend, after I surrendered my life to Jesus, I said, Ginger, and I told my kids, they're all young at that time. Keep in mind, this is 30 years now. I told Ginger, I said, I've got no one to blame but myself. No one put a gun to my head to force me to be part of a price-fixing scheme. Nobody put a gun to my head to write 5 checks for $9 million. I got no one to blame but myself. And my wife had not heard that the entire time. And I apologized to her of everything I put her through. And I said, Ginger, I don't blame you for leaving me if you do leave. She said, Mark, I'm not going to leave you. I've been praying for you for a decade. And she said, there's lots of times I wanted to run, but God told me to stay. And she stayed, and we're married 43 years today. 43 years that she visits me every weekend for 8.5 years. A miracle of God. Our marriage has survived that. If you serve 5 years and longer, the official statistic is in the 90% range. 5 years and longer. 90% range, and we're married for 43 years. A miracle. Our kids are stronger and they're all older than I was even when this case happened. Our youngest is 37 today, actually. Turned 37. And keep in mind, I was 34 when I was wearing a wire, 32. So our kids are all older than I was, and they're walking with the Lord. And I tell you, I give my wife credit for that. My wife looks back. She did an interview when the movie came out on CBS News, national news. I was in California doing another interview in 2009 when the movie came out. She was doing an interview, and they asked Ginger on CBS News in New York. They said, how'd you do it? She said the same thing I told you earlier. She said, divorce wasn't an option, but murder was. And there were a couple times she wanted to do it. And they asked her when she was most mad. She said the most mad when he took a 6-month plea agreement and I threw it in her face. And said the entire case was her fault. She said, Ginger, what would have happened if your husband, and this was someone in the secular world, this wasn't a Christian asking these questions, but what a great question God led. He said, what would have happened if your husband signed that 6-month plea agreement? She said, I was mad and I wanted to kill him at the time, but I looked back and she said, thank God he didn't sign it. He would have never listened to Ian Howes and Chuck Colson. Thank God he didn't sign the 6-month sentence. He would have came out the same greedy man he went in. And she said, God gave him exactly what he needed, which was 8.5 years in prison. I think 2 years would have been enough. I would have loved to have been on that interview. But I do agree 6 months would have not been. I had to be broken. I had to be the end of myself. And I look back and I thank God for what happened. I thank God for brokenness. And my wife and I, my marriage, if I stayed at ADM, would have not survived. If I got a 6-month sentence, I don't think my marriage would survive. If I would have had the full immunity that I originally had, I think I would have lost my family. Thank God for brokenness. Thank God for going through the fire. I am so appreciative of that now, 25, 30 years later. 65 years old now. This all happened wearing a wire when I was 34, 31 years ago. So I thank God for that today. The companies that I stole from on the price-fixing scheme, Coke and Tyson Foods and Procter & Gamble, they were paid hundreds of millions of dollars back from class action suits. Coca-Cola alone was $400 million paid back. They put an $800,000 whistleblower reward for my wife for her turning me in because they were so appreciative. It was about $100,000 a year while I was in prison to put my kids through college, help her have a small home. The people I stole from took care of my family for 8.5 years. Wow. Miracle of God. Miracle of God. The company I work for today, Coca-Cola Consolidated, was a victim of the case. I work for a company I stole from, a user of high fructose corn syrup in beverages. And I work for them today, leading the T-Factor initiative. Coca-Cola Consolidated is a different company than Coca-Cola Atlanta. Coca-Cola Company is the largest bottler, the Consolidated. Largest bottler. Different CEO, Frank Harrison, different board, different ownership. We're on the NASDAQ, and Coca-Cola Company in Atlanta is on the New York Stock Exchange. Two different companies, the bottling side and Coca-Cola Company. And we have a purpose statement for 23 years. Our CEO, Frank Harrison, put it in place. Our only purpose is to honor God in all we do by serving others, pursuing excellence, and growing profitably. We are a faith-based, purpose-driven company, and we're a publicly traded company. We have 102 plant sites. We have a chaplain in every plant. Over 100 prayer groups and Bible studies. One prayer call I was on recently had 400 people on it. It's about God, God in the center, and about our people, and it's changed our culture the last 23 years. And I lead that, T-Factor, which stands for transformation. So God gave me a second chance at another large organization, but this time doing it His way and not my way. And I feel so blessed to have a second chance. Even when I got out of prison, I was hired by a biotech company. Started like at age 49, like someone right out of college, cancer research company. I became the COO of that company after 10 years, and I'm still on their advisory board today, and I became the #2 executive after 4 promotions of that company. And we turned that company into a faith-based company. Christian CEO, all about God, God at the center. I think there's no better place for ministry than the marketplace. I stand in front of you here today as a PhD scientist from Cornell University. God does exist and Jesus is the Son of God. And I have zero doubts in my mind. Zero doubts. And I don't live just on faith alone anymore. I've seen the evidence. The evidence that God could turn my life even just from ashes to beauty. That the companies I stole from take care of my family. The companies I stole from my work for today. I don't take it lightly. Second chances do exist. And God is about redemption and second chances. So great to be here today and to share with all of you. Thanks for having me. And God bless all of you. And thank you for allowing me to share. Thank you.
see, thanks, Mark, again for that. Oh, I mean, I'll start with Ben, not you. You may have known that. Thank you for sharing your story with us. That was exceptional. And, you know, as I mentioned at the end, if there's any way we can help you find your next step to take in any way, you know, you can click that QR code and just let us know, or come up to us in person, and we'd be glad to have a conversation, lead forward from there. I would like to do is ask one of our team members here to watch best, Trey, if you just come and close us down.